Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. Want to improve your organization's customer service? Looking for insider tips to knock your customer socks off? Then you're in the right place. Here's your host, Yannick Grant.
Welcome to Navigating the Customer Experience. On today's episode, our guest is Peter C. Yesawich. Peter is chairman of Hospitable Healthcare Partners, LLC, a marketing consultancy serving hospitality and the healthcare industry clients, and vice chairman Emeritus of MMGY Global, one of the country's leading marketing communications companies renowned for its strategic thinking, breakthrough creativity, and innovation in marketing practice. Yesawich has contributed to the development of marketing programs for some of the industry's most popular brands, destinations, and organizations, including Fairmont Hotel and Resorts, Hilton International, Disney Parks and Resorts, Universal Studios, Atlantis, the Broadmoor, Sandals Resorts, Wynn Las Vegas, Marriott Vacation Club International, the Mexico Tourism Board, and the U.S. Olympic Committee, to name a few. He is co-author of Marketing Leadership in Hospitality and Tourism and the new book, Hospitable Healthcare, Just What the Patient Ordered. So without further delay, sit back, plug your earphones in, and let's jump right into this conversation with Peter. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Yannick. Good morning.
Good morning. This special episode will be unfolding in two captivating parts. Part 1 sets the tone and will be released this week, as you are listening to, and Part 2 will be next week, bringing it all together. So stay tuned and don't miss out on any of the action. Could you share a little bit about your journey? I know in your bio it gives us a summary of, the clients that you've worked with, some of the impact that you've had, but we always like to hear in the own words of our guests, their words, of how their journey has been and how they got to where they are today.
Happy to. Yeah, thank you. Well, most of my career has been spent in the hospitality field, as you mentioned in your introduction there. Actually, when I finished school, I have a PhD in psychology, and I never practiced clinically, but I always wanted to use the education to understand the influence of marketing communication. So that's what I did for a period of roughly 35 years. And then for a 10-year period, I took a sabbatical and I went into the healthcare business. And I did that for a bunch of reasons, but I joined a national oncology company by the name of Cancer Treatment Centers of America. We had 5 destination hospitals, 10 clinics, served about 15,000 patients annually. So I had a unique perspective in hospitality, having worked with a number of the brands you mentioned, and in healthcare. And when I got to healthcare, it was very obvious to me that the healthcare experience for patients could be improved significantly if healthcare providers simply adopted many of the principles that have essentially led to the success of hospitality brands. So that's the short version. And then a couple of years ago, I was in Las Vegas making a speech, and I was in the green room and I bumped into a gentleman by the name of Stowe Shoemaker. And he's a gentleman I've known for probably 20, 25 plus years. He's a gentleman who has a very distinguished career in academia. And he, at the time, was the dean of the hospitality management program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And prior to that, he was at Houston, at the University of Houston, where he also had a joint appointment with the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So we're trading notes, and I said, Stowe, it's amazing. Your background is very similar to mine because we both have experience in hospitality and healthcare. And we had the same kind of perspective, and that is that the healthcare experience could really be improved. And that's what ultimately led to us writing this book.
Awesome. So hospitality and healthcare, those are two very important industries. Hospitality is more about fun, and healthcare, of course, is about, just living a healthy lifestyle. But seeing that you have exposure and experience in both industries, would you say there are some common themes in terms of customer service expectations that customers would have, so across the different, because at the end of the day, if you go into a resort or a hotel, you're going on vacation 9 out of 10 times. I mean, people travel for business as well, but pretty much you're not in pain. Whereas 9 out of 10 times, if you're going to healthcare, you go for your checkups, but most people a lot of times are already in pain while they're visiting their doctor,
Sure,
whether it be a
sure.
clinic, a hospital. So, have you seen any common themes as it relates to customer service delivery on the part of the service provider that you think is universal to both areas?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is there are many. In fact, let me begin by asking a question of your listeners, which is the way I really like to start the conversation. And that is, I ask, can you think of a healthcare experience that you've had that was either unsatisfactory or gone wrong? And the answer for everyone is absolutely yes. Everybody has a story about a healthcare experience that went wrong. And then I stop them and I say, well, think about the primary reason for that. And it's interesting to note that very rarely is the clinical outcome the reason. Clinical outcome generally is very satisfactory for people in healthcare. But the reason primarily is the way the healthcare service was delivered. So to your question, Unique, we actually began writing this book by doing a survey of 1,200 adults in the U.S. And what we did is we looked at 22 common points of customer engagement that are unique to both healthcare and hospitality. For example, the very front end, how easy or difficult is it to get an appointment? We all hear stories about someone who wants to make an appointment with a certain type of medical specialist, and they're disappointed because it takes weeks or months to do that. How does that experience compare with, making a reservation, for example? And then all the way through, whether or not you know the cost of the service before it's provided. In the hospitality industry, you absolutely do, because when you book, at that point, typically the cost of the service is confirmed. Unfortunately, in the healthcare business, after you confirm an appointment, it's very rare that you know the cost of the service before you receive it. And I'm sure you've got a story. Everybody has a story about a surprise medical bill, and how disappointing and unnerving that is.
Mm-hmm.
All the way through whether or not the provider asks you for feedback on the experience. Last night, for example, I had dinner with some friends and we booked the reservation on OpenTable. And true to form, this morning, 8 o'clock, I get an email from OpenTable that says, "How was your experience?" I will also tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I had an executive physical at a very well-known healthcare provider, and I have yet to hear from them to ask me about my experience as a patient. So point is that there are 22 of these points of customer engagement that we measured in the survey with 1,200 adults. And basically what we did is we asked them to rate their experience in 5 categories to compare their reaction or their experience on the 22 points of service engagement for hospitals, number 1, for walk-in clinics, number 2, for doctors' offices, number 3, for lodging, number 4, that would be hotels and resorts,
Mm-hmm.
and the 5th was in dining and restaurants. So the way to think about this is we have kind of a 5 by 22 matrix, and when each cell we have 1,200 observations. So we have a really, really robust kind of basis analysis. And the punchline in all of that, to your question about the common points of customer engagement, what we then calculated is what we call the hospitality deficit. And that is, how much people felt the experience in healthcare was a deficit in terms of the service experience versus hospitality. And out of that came 5 specific themes. I'm happy to talk you through those, but that's a lot to kind of process. But the answer is, yeah, there are 22 common points of customer engagement that we identified and we examined.
Perfect. So 22, that's a lot. You want to kind of just maybe run through maybe just list the 22 for us, and then maybe you could talk about some of the ones that, were near and dear to your heart.
Sure. Well, what we did is we actually collapsed these into 5 themes. So let me kind of just talk to those specifically, and then we can drill down on any of them that would be of interest to you.
Mm-hmm.
So the number one source of this deficit in service delivery between healthcare and hospitality is what I mentioned a moment ago, and that is for individuals not knowing or understanding the cost of the service before they receive it. And, we've all had that experience in healthcare. whether it's if the bill is easy to understand or difficult to understand, whether or not you have to, if you know how much to pay for the service before you receive it, and then whether or not the cost of the service is consistent with your expectation. So all of those kind of roll up into that first trend. And that is the primary source of dissatisfaction patients have with the healthcare experience. And I think you can probably think of an example for you personally. I know I have them. I'm sure your listeners have them. The second theme that came out of this, really interesting, was the fact that patients in healthcare don't feel like their business, so to speak, is appreciated by the providers. Now, in hospitality, you get many thank yous, right? You get a thank you when you check in, a thank you when you check out. You get a thank you when the waiter takes the order. You get a thank you when the bill's presented. And if you think about, the expressions of appreciation patients have in healthcare, that's very rare. It's almost like, in many respects, for some providers, you, the patient, should be thanking the provider for the provider delivering the service. But that's the second kind of source of this deficit. The third is the whole arrival experience and reception. And, we all have kind of stories about, the clipboard, the dreaded clipboard, when you show up at the doctor's office and they hand you the clipboard and say, please fill this out. And the irony is you may have filled out the same clipboard a couple of weeks prior, right? Either at the same physician's office or, or a similar, maybe a referral that has been made. But how about the whole environment? A lot of doctors' offices and hospitals have worked hard on that in recent years, but it's still nothing like, walking into a 3 or 4 star hotel or a restaurant where they've really given a lot of thought to things like colors and textures and aromas and all the things that really do impact our sense of arrival and the way we're greeted when we arrive too. The fourth theme is what we call service logistics, and that's this ease or difficulty of making an appointment or getting a reservation. And then the other the aspect of that is the check-in process. Is it easy? I suspect many of your listeners are members of frequency programs, like whether it's with hotels or airlines or restaurants. And, they've worked very hard to create these customer profiles, right? They understand your preferences. They know that, maybe you like a certain type of pillow in a hotel or a certain type of bedding or a seat on an airplane. It's interesting in the healthcare business, that kind of information, although it's readily available, is very rarely tracked and used. So what happens is the check-in process becomes very cumbersome. I go back to the idea of the dreaded clipboard, but it's providing the same information over and over again. Or, the other thing in hospitality is, that's been very effective in terms of recognizing customers is giving them a little special attention. And so, for example, if you're a member of a loyalty program for a hotel company, you might check in at a different location at the front desk. So they might have a little plaque there that says, reserved for our loyalty members or whatever. In the airline business, people scramble to get loyalty status so they can get an overhead bin, when they get on the plane, or then maybe they have a chance to, pick a seat ahead of time. So the whole idea is that there's some special recognition. Doesn't happen in healthcare, right? You stand in the same line with everybody else, whether or not you're a repeat patient or a first-time patient.
That's
And
so
then the
true.
last, and we can talk about that because there are ways to solve that in healthcare, but they don't exist today. And then the last theme here is what we call service recovery. For example, if you're off in a restaurant and the entree comes and you're unhappy, and you mention that to the waiter or waitress, what happens is they're very quick to remove it, replace it, and they might even give you a complimentary dessert, right? Say, sorry that happened. Or if you're really unhappy, they just take it off your bill. Okay. Whatever happens when people contest a charge from a healthcare provider? Have you ever tried to do that? You know what happens. It goes nowhere, right? And so many times you're arguing with the insurance company, or you might even be arguing with the provider. But the point is that service recovery is very poor in healthcare, and it's very good in hospitality. So those are the 5 themes. It's knowing the cost of the service, being appreciated as a customer, the whole arrival experience, the service logistics, that is the check-in process and so forth, and then finally service recovery. So the 22, we kind of collapse into those five.
Right, right. Honestly, to be really honest, like of all the themes that you mentioned just now, the one that you mentioned about loyalty from a healthcare
Mm-hmm.
perspective, that was like a BFO for me, a blinding flash of the obvious. Because
Mm-hmm.
you're so right. Like most industries have some form of reward that you get for being loyal to them. I don't
Right.
have one doctor that I go to, my ophthalmologist, my gynecologist, my
Mm-hmm.
GP. None of them have, and I've been going to them for years. My dermatologist, I've been going to her from I'm
That's
16.
right.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't they benefit from making their customers, their patients feel like they value them? Because the reality is we can switch. I've switched
Yep.
doctors,
Yep.
in the years I've been going for various reasons. I remember when I
Sure.
just had my daughter, the pediatrician was extremely cold in some feedback she had given me.
Mm-hmm.
He had given me rather. When she was
Mm-hmm.
6 months old, she had this really high temperature. I was a first time mom. I was 24, and I
Mm-hmm.
called the office to schedule an appointment because I was doing all the things at home to get the fever down and it wasn't working. And
Mm-hmm.
their response was, I should just bring her in later in the day. And then when I spoke to him, finally, he said, well, he was playing golf. And that statement in itself made me switch. I mean, I've told that story
Yeah.
to so many people. She's
Right.
18. She turned 18 2 weeks ago, and that was when she was 6 months old. And I've never forgotten it. And I would never recommend
Sure.
anybody to go to him based on that
Sure.
experience. And,
Sure.
it's
You
just
know,
amazing.
Yep. You hit the nail on the head with that. One of the things that we examine in the book is we actually created a model, a service model for healthcare practitioners that has five elements in it. It's called the PAYER model. That's an abbreviation, PAER. The P
Hmm.
is to prepare, okay, for the patients, and that's the whole idea of learning more about them before they arrive. The next is A, which is to anticipate, which gets into this whole issue of the anxiety that people feel when they're pursuing healthcare services, particularly if it's in kind of an emergency situation. We can come back to that in a second. The second, the first E is the engagement process. That's this checking on the arrival and how easy or difficult it is. The second E is evaluation. Okay, that's asking for feedback. And the last is R, which is what you just mentioned, which is reward. So let's just take a second and explore that. And let me digress for a second because this is a little bit of humor, but I think it makes the point. We open the book with a story about a fictitious patient. It's a guy who is in his mid 40s and he lives in Ohio and he's pretty concerned about his health. He goes for an annual physical and his PCP says, okay, time for your first colonoscopy. So we chronicle this guy's experience, trying to get a hold of the gastroenterologist, making an appointment, how difficult that was. The fact that he shows up, they don't really recognize him, have no background information. So he's got to take a half an hour with the clipboard to fill all that out. The fact that he doesn't know the physician, and the first time he sees the gastroenterologist is when he's lying on the gurney, and they roll him in. He has the colonoscopy, and he wakes up and says, well, how did you do? And they said, well, we can't tell you, but maybe a couple of days we'll have some results. So the guy worries all the way home, finally gets some good news. But a couple of days later, he gets a bill in the mail from the anesthesiologist that he wasn't expected. It was another $700. Nobody told him about that.
Right.
And a week later, he gets another bill, which is the equivalent of a 1 month's mortgage payment that
Wow.
nobody told him about. So the guy goes, whoa. Well, 6 weeks later, he and his wife decide to go to Vegas for a weekend. So they go online and they look at the options. They find a spectacular hotel on the strip. The guy's a member of the hotel's loyalty program. So when they show up, he goes to the front desk. They say, Mr. Smith, we're delighted to let you know we've upgraded you to a suite. And the guy goes, whoa, that's terrific. So they go to the suite. They have a wonderful time dining and shows and so forth. He's ready to check out. So he looks at the app on his phone. It's exactly what he thought it was going to cost. And he's when he gets to the front to the exit, the doorman says, "Mr. Smith, we hope you had a wonderful time, and we can't wait to see you again." By the way, nobody said that to him when he left the gastro's office. And so then he, 2 weeks later, gets his visa bill, and it's exactly what he thought it was going to be. And he notices he gets 3,000 reward points for his trip to Vegas. And so we asked the question, why didn't he get reward points for his colonoscopy? Now, when I say that, most people go, what? What, are you kidding? And we say, no, we're not kidding. It's to your point. Why do healthcare providers not have loyalty programs? And you'd think that that would make more sense in healthcare, because the older we get, the more healthcare we use.
Yep, true.
And so you'd think, well, there'd be reasons to encourage people to come back. Well, and the answer to that, Unique, is most people in healthcare have never thought about it. They didn't think it was appropriate. Now, there are certain legal restrictions if you have like Medicare and Medicaid, where you can't have any kind of financial inducement for people to come for care. But 2/3 of the people in this country that with a healthcare insurance, it's a commercial insurance, and that is absolutely appropriate. So anyway, we think that's a horizon that you're going to see a lot more of in healthcare, that more and more healthcare providers are going to start introducing these loyalty programs. And it doesn't have to be any kind of financial incentive. It could be, maybe it's free cancer screenings. Maybe it's free educational programs on nutritional foods, or maybe it's yoga classes. Things that get you to live a healthier life. But it's absolutely a wonderful point, and we think it's going to be more popular in the future.
Yeah, that's definitely a gap that they're missing out on. Absolutely. Brilliant. All right. Love that. That we dovetail so nicely into that. And you're able to kind of give us a pretty good synopsis of what the book is about. I have started consuming it. I remember that story about the gentleman at the beginning, because I do remember reading that at the beginning. Haven't completed the book fully yet, but I'm really enjoying the content and the comparisons, which is why I asked that first question at the beginning. So I'm really appreciative of how you went into it and gave us some really good examples. Great. Now, Peter, could you also share with us, what's the one online resource, tool, website, or app that you absolutely can't live without in your business?
Boy, that's a great question. And I will tell you that, I'm sure like I'm everybody else. And that is, it's got to be Google. It's just a wealth of information, which ultimately, leads to more specific, sites and content that reflect the uniqueness of the search.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Just want to remind our listeners that you can join our private Facebook group at Navigating the Customer Experience Community, and feel free to follow us on Twitter at NavigatingCX. Until next time, I'm your host, Yannick Grant.
Thanks for listening. For more awesome resources to take your customer service game to another level, head over to navigatingthecustomerexperience.com. See you next time.